this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to be installing a full banner kit. This is for the RE5R05A, our 5-speed Jatco transmission. Now, when I say a full banner kit, what does that mean? Well, I get my paper and rubber. So here are all of the rubber seals and paper gaskets in the transmission. We see the pump seal and the rear seal, and all of the friction clutches. And oftentimes what you're doing is you may be installing a performance clutch. But here we're going to go with the Exceedi clutch set for this transmission. As you can see, they're listing a Nissan Infiniti RE5R05A. Obviously, we've got to get a new band. On some of the release pistons, they're molded. So what happens is I have a release piston kit. They'll be replaced. And of course, obviously, this is an excellent idea. Let's go ahead and replace that screen filter. So when we get done with this unit, it should be in top 1 condition. And remember, it is getting a remanufactured torque converter. Okay, now this is the transmission torque converter, and this was kind of the problem area here for our vehicle, is that it had troubles with shuddering or chattering as it applied. Now, of course, you want to make sure you're using the correct fluid. The fluid has not been changed on this unit. It was using the factory fill and hadn't been touched from day one. Now we're going to be replacing this torque converter with a remanufactured torque converter. We use several suppliers. They actually are going to cut it open there at the weld and carefully inspect the components, replace the actual friction clutches and inspect the steels, replace the rubber seal there on the apply piston if applicable. Now, as far as this hub is concerned, they're going to inspect that very carefully, and if necessary, they'll actually either sleeve or replace that hub. Now, this hub actually looks to be in excellent condition. Now, obviously, on some applications, which we call R&R, they actually rebuild the converter from the vehicle because it's not readily available. It's an unusual vehicle. But in this case, they do an awful lot of this style transmission, so I'll be able to get a remanufactured unit right off the shelf and turn this one in as a core. Okay, now we're getting ready to remove the bell housing and the front pump. Now, first thing I want to do is very carefully remove this O-ring, and there, as I open my kit, oftentimes this O-ring is loose, and usually it has a green dye mark on it. You want to make sure you find that O-ring. It's extremely important. What I like to do is I'll put it in the container that the pump bolts are going into. That way I can clearly see, hey, don't forget to put that there. Now, on Nissan and some other manufacturers, they like to put a little bit of sealant around the bolts. And of course, we'll do that as we go back with it. Now, the bell housing bolts themselves, and this is a separate bell housing, that way the same transmission can be fitted to numerous engines, is separate, and these bolts are very different. You won't have any problems getting them confused. Okay, now this is a good place to use an impact. I'll normally use the impact for disassembly, but not for assembly. So this will allow me to quickly remove all the bolts. Now you'll notice that when you take one of these units apart, that these lower bell housing bolts will actually be of a different color and have a little bit of Loctite applied to the threads. Now, why is that? Now, I believe it's for corrosion, because if you look, this passage does not go to any type of hydraulic passage at all. So it would be no reason for it to be providing some type of seal. But apparently, here in this lower extremities, these bolts can possibly corrode there between the steel and aluminum. Now, I normally don't have a problem because this bolt is actually plated, but yes, you'll notice that they like to use a different color bolt and a little bit of Loctite. Now, here we see the original 3 bolts with the Loctite, and this also is kind of a testimony to that this is a initial disassembly of this transmission from the factory, because this had not been disturbed. Now we're ready to move to the pump bolts. Okay, here I've used an impact to take out my pump bolts, and as you can see, there's sealant on each one. Now obviously I need to clean that a little and freshen it there as I go back together. And again, we talked about how important the O-ring is for the converter clutch. Now this tool wouldn't absolutely be necessary on this unit, but it certainly helps and just makes things a lot easier. And what this is going to do is it pushes against the turbine shaft and allows me to pull the pump body from the case. And as you can see, I'm just barely turning it, and you can see that pump body just walk forward. No problem. And then once it's free, this actually gives me a good handle to actually hold it and withdraw it from the unit. So here we go. Let's go ahead and just gently push it back. Make sure you take your O-ring off, and there we go. Here we have the pump. All right, this is the race for that forward sprag. It looks in excellent condition. There's the race for the Torrington bearing. This looks good. We'll actually split the pump and inspect it carefully. Here, I'm done with my pump removal tool, so I'll go ahead and carefully remove it. It grabs the stator support beyond the spline, so it's not damaging anything. In fact, normally it doesn't even leave any type of mark whatsoever. So this is an excellent tool. It can be used with all types of automatic transmissions. The only thing is, be careful if you have a turbine shaft that has some type of like check valve, like some of the like a 4L60E, then obviously put a socket there so you're not going to touch or damage that valve. But you see, I don't have that here, so this is fine, no problem. Okay, here we're going to remove that front sun gear. And the sun gear there, as we look at the front of the vehicle, is prevented from counterclockwise rotation by this sprag clutch and clockwise rotation by our band. And one thing we're very concerned with is the condition of this drum, and it looks to be in excellent condition. The sprag looks to be in excellent condition. Okay, here what I like to do is build the transmission up, and here we see the front pump, and we have inspected the sprag and the drum. It's in excellent condition. You can see the sprag allows, and remember, from the front of the transmission this would be clockwise. I realize from the back it's counterclockwise, but allows rotation in one direction and locks it in the other. Okay, at this point I want to go ahead and remove the band, and I'm just carefully picking it up off its anchor, picking it up off the piston, and just kind of gently coaxing it forward. Be careful, don't scratch it. And here it comes. There we go. Now let's take a look at that. That band is in excellent condition, no problems, but it is getting a new one. Okay, here we see the input shaft. They're going to the input drum and the front planetary, and this all comes out as an assembly. Now, I noticed that we've seen some comments to say, hey, this looks like an awful lot like a 5G-tronic Mercedes. Well, yes, it does, as a matter of fact, and I'm going to guess that Jatco and Mercedes there kind of work together, and you'll notice that for the 9G-tronic, Japanese automatic transmission company is actually manufacturing that under license for some of the larger Nissan vehicles. Okay, here we're continuing to unload the case. Now, at this point, you want to go ahead and let's go ahead and remove the band anchor and the band servo, because I'm going to have trouble pulling this out, getting past this. So let's go ahead and take this apart, and we're going to be rebuilding the servo piston anyway. Now, remember, before you can remove the snap ring, you're going to have to compress this spring. And as you can see, this works very nicely. This is just one of the little quick grip clamps, oftentimes used for woodworking, but it has all kinds of applications. And I'm just going to reach in here, squeeze the snap ring, and carefully remove it. There we go. Squeeze it, careful, under a lot of tension there. Okay, now, don't forget, before I can remove the snap ring, I've got to compress the piston a little bit. And as you can see, I'm just using a little Irwin quick grip clamp. And this works very nicely. Just compress the spring, and then I can use my favorite pair of snap ring pliers to carefully compress the snap ring and remove it from the bore. Now, in the kit, I'm going to have new sealing rings here for the piston. So here we just push it up a little bit, so we will be replacing all these sealing rings. They're actually O-rings, but here we go. And there's the piston itself. And we'll wash it carefully in solvent. Now this is oftentimes an area where debris can build up, but as you can see, I have very little debris on this particular unit. Okay, now we're continuing our disassembly process. Okay, here we're coming out with the output planetary. Now, this is actually the output shaft, and if I had taken the rear tail housing off, this would be gone. But here's the output planetary splining to the output shaft, and on the Mercedes, this is all one unit. And so here we go, carefully looking at the condition of the gears. Here we see the Torrington bearings, and I'll go ahead and just carefully lay it up here on our stack.